From R-Type to Contra to Gunsmoke, the 1980s was an amazing decade full of fun and wildly different shoot-'em-ups. If you like dodging bullets and blowing everything up in sight, then there was a game for you, guaranteed. Now comes PopSlinger, a shooter that wants to take you back to the decade that gave us hair metal and acid-wash jeans. It's a neon-filled action game that may wrap itself in the trappings of the 1980s, but stops short of paying homage to the classic shooters of that era. Will that get in the way of your nostalgia trip? Find out now when I review PopSlinger from Funky Can Creative. No, you're not experiencing deja vu. This is the same throwback shooter that was released 2 years ago on the Switch and the PC. Now it's time for PlayStation and Xbox owners to be introduced to Rhea Carbon, a spunky and aggressively upbeat hero who's tasked with using a bunch of soda-inspired guns to save the universe from dark forces. She's joined by the spirit of Jin, a former PopSlinger who's cynical and speaks with almost a monotone drawl. Together, the two polar opposites fight against the Corazones, a group of anime-inspired characters whose hearts have been corrupted and need to be popped. This is a good-looking action game that is clearly inspired by the look and characters found in a lot of the American riffs on Japanese anime. I was immediately reminded of shows like Steven Universe and Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, especially when it comes to the Corazones and their unique and always silly stories. There's a really fun dynamic between the two leads, and I was endlessly amused by Jin's frustration with the always bubbly and upbeat Rhea. In fact, the story and the 1980s trappings are so much fun that it almost overshadows the shoot-'em-up mechanics. Unlike most run-and-gun shooters where you basically kill anybody in sight, you'll want to be a little bit more selective in PopSlinger. There's a color gimmick in this game that'll have you trying to kill 4 similar enemies in order to earn power-ups from Jin. For example, you'll want to kill 4 yellow enemies in a row, followed by 4 red or purple enemies. What you'll do is you'll start to tie these colors together to create useful powers and boost your score. Of course, the trick to the game is that the 4 yellow enemies might not all be in a row, forcing you to dodge purple and red bad guys and search for that 4th yellow enemy. And you have to understand that all this is happening as your combo timer ticks down. So there's no time for delay, you gotta hurry to find that 4th yellow bad guy. The color collection will break the moment that Rhea gets hit or kills the wrong colored enemy. So there really is some strategy involved in maximizing the game's systems in order to earn as many points as possible. Now, as I said at the top, Rhea battles the Corazones and the rest of the Dark Forces using a series of soda-inspired guns. We start out with a pretty typical single-shot gun, followed by a spread shot, and a sustained bazooka shot that looks like it came straight out of one of those Marvel vs. Capcom games. There's also a weapon that acts a lot like a soda grenade launcher, hurting anything that's pretty much inside of the splash zone. These are fun variations on the standard weapons, and it's cute how Rhea yells out the gun's name anytime she switches between them on the fly. So as the levels get harder, you'll run into enemies with different shaped shields. Each shape can only be defeated by a certain gun, so you can't get lazy and just rely on a spread shot to do all the work. Switching between the different weapons is a big part of the game and the strategy, and getting good at quickly cycling guns is the only way to complete some of the later stages. It's here where we start to find some of the inherent problems with the gameplay. Let's go ahead and start with the obvious issue. Rhea can only shoot left or right. This is the kind of game where you can walk all around the level, but your shooting is surprisingly limited. You'll have to be directly in front or directly behind the enemies if you want to kill them, which will obviously put Rhea and her color combo in a great deal of danger. This isn't so bad at first, but ends up becoming a big issue in the second half of the game after the different shields are introduced. The big concern here is the speed, or more specifically, the leisurely approach to the action this game has. Aside from the big bazooka blast, your guns shoot slowly, and switching between the weapons takes a little bit longer than you might expect. Look, even if it's just a few seconds, that's often enough time for the enemy to rush in and get a cheap hit on our hero. You'll find that once you pop the enemy's shield, they'll bum rush Rhea and just stick to her like glue. This is especially frustrating when you're battling waves of bad guys, as those arenas are small and boxed in. A lot of your success will come down to memorizing what enemies have what shields and then killing the big bad guys as quickly as possible. Of course, it doesn't help that the different enemy shields are a little confusing. Look, I get it. It's easy to know which shields are which when there's just one and you have a second to register its shape. However, when there are 4 or 5 shielded characters coming at you at once, it can definitely feel a bit overwhelming. And it doesn't help that the shields aren't color-coded. A perfect example of this is the blue squiggly line shield, which you would think would be defeated with maybe your blue gun. But it's not. It requires the green soda grenade launcher. Obviously, you're going to be able to memorize the shapes over time. And that's just one example of how this game seemingly goes out of its way to confuse you. Now, it's also worth mentioning that the difficulty is all over the place. This is the kind of game that seems almost too easy for the first half, only to immediately get insanely difficult. And then, once you've actually managed to overcome that difficulty spike, the game's right back to being way too easy. This is only compounded by the relatively short story. There really aren't that many levels to beat, and the few that are here are a lot shorter than I would have liked. This is the type of action game that would have benefited greatly from having twice as many stages, as shoot-'em-up fans will likely have no problem beating PopSlinger in just a single sitting or two. Look, even though the action doesn't feel much like the classic shooters of the 1980s, I like the game's look and style. The heroes and boss enemies do a lot of the heavy lifting here, and I have a hunch that if I remember anything about this game, it's going to be those colorful characters. You can see the developers toying with a lot of great ideas and concepts, but I would argue that it doesn't all come together in the end. This is a game with a cool story and great characters that is undermined by disappointing shoot-'em-up mechanics. I may not be able to enthusiastically recommend PopSlinger. I can't wait to see what Funky Can Creative does next. It's hard to resist the style and charm of PopSlinger, a throwback shoot-'em-up now making its way to PlayStation and Xbox consoles. With strong characters and a story full of 1980s nostalgia, there really is a lot to like about this all-too-brief action game. Unfortunately, the shallow gameplay mechanics aren't quite at the same level as the presentation. The soda-inspired weapons are cool in concept, but not all that different in execution, and there are just a lot of weird gameplay decisions that feel like they were made at random. And then, it just ends right as it's starting to get good. I don't know, maybe it's because I'm not all that into soda. But PopSlinger failed to quench my shoot-'em-up thirst. Hey, thanks for watching our review. If you liked what you saw here, then you should know that we post new reviews and features almost every day. Now, here's the question I have for you. What's your favorite throwback shoot-'em-up? I'm really looking for a recent shooter that mimics the stuff from the 1980s and 90s. Here, I'll go first. There's that game Risk System that came out a few years ago that looks almost exactly like a late generation Genesis shooter. That's a really great one. And I can't wait to see your picks in the comments below. In other news, we'll be back tomorrow with a brand new episode of Nintendo Switch Online Review Crew. Will it feature new releases from Nintendo? Well, I guess we'll find out tomorrow. While you wait for that, I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then,